Welcome to the Limitless Potential podcast, where together we will dive into the personal, business, and career-rich tips, techniques, stories, and experiences of some incredibly successful and inspirational people, each with their own perspectives and journeys, and each with golden nuggets of wisdom which might just change your life. I'm Tracy Stone, and I'm a master trainer in a number of career supercharging techniques, a transformational coach, international best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and a woman discovering and evolving my very own limitless potential day by day.
Determined. I went to yoga and one thing
You're going to stand up at your stage.
Celebrate yourself.
Spiritual things are very, very second and I heard.
And so once a week, each of you take.
Now I got that message and I see this happening many times again. I see it in a positive way.
Hi, and welcome back for another episode of the Limitless Potential podcast. And today I'm delighted to welcome Sylvia Cohen, founder and business owner of Sylvia Cohen Communications, who joins us today from London. Sylvia is the UK's go-to voice and body language expert, and she trained with one of Barak Obama's original voice and media trainers. She helps her clients to improve communication skills, increase visibility, and create better outcomes and impact within their field and at top industry level. This results in more visibility, in better business outcomes, and higher turnover of profit. Sylvia has over 15 years experience with industry leaders and experts at boardroom level in both corporate and creative companies such as the Kering Group, Ernst and Young, Groupon and Condé Nast. Quite a list. Welcome, Sylvia, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome. No problem at all. So, Sylvia, as we get going into this conversation, sorry, Sylvia, you said Sharon. It's Tracy.
Oh, Tracy. Oh, my goodness. Right. Let's do it again. Tracy, sorry. Right. Here we go.
No problem. So, welcome, Sylvia, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show, Tracy.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure. So, Sylvia, you've got a wonderful bio and you have worked with some incredible names. And I know that the work that you do creates such a shift in people's lives, their careers and their business. It really takes people to the next level. But you didn't start there as an incredibly successful voice and body language expert. You had to become that. So if you would you take us back to the start, Sylvia?
Wow, where to begin at the start? So if I go all the way back to the start, I was always very good at speaking when I was a kid. So I learned to talk quite early, and I was very good at articulating messages, when I was a toddler and when I was a small child. When I got to primary school, it became very clear that this did not translate into the read or the written word for me. So I really struggled in the first few years of primary school, and it was in the 80s, and people were just beginning to talk about things like dyslexia, and lots of people still didn't believe that even dyslexia existed. And actually I was very lucky because my mum really picked up that something wasn't clicking, and so she really pushed for me to be assessed, and it was discovered that I had dyslexia. So I really understand what it's like for people who, are brilliant in one area and find it very difficult to articulate their message in another area. Now, for me, I couldn't articulate my message in the written word for years. And so I probably, if I'm being really honest, a lot of what I do started all the way back then, because now what I do is I help people often who can't articulate their message into a physical and vocal language, which resonates with the room that they're speaking to. I help them articulate that message into a language that they can communicate through the spoken word and through their physicality. So probably if we're going all the way right back, that's probably where it started. And the other thing to pull up, which will take us into the future about that, is what I discover actually about a lot of the people that I work with really at the top level, and especially at top level in creative industries, is quite often they reflect this, not the same experience as me, but they will reflect an experience in some way where I think often actually within the school environment, something hasn't quite clicked. So I'm also aware, and I see it reflected with all of my clients today, that quite often people who might struggle at school might not learn in a very conventional way, also move on to excel in certain industries. So, that's a bit of a sideline, but it's something worth kind of mentioning now, I guess. So I got through school. I was really lucky. I got the help that I needed, and I wasn't a great fan of school, but I did well enough. And it was very clear that I was probably going to go into acting. So when I was quite young, I did quite a lot of stuff with, it was the Bristol BBC channel. I can't remember what it's called. HTV, it was called, HTV, Bristol HTV. So I was in their drama group, and I did some little acting bits when I was a kid. And then in my teens, I was in the National Youth Theatre. So I was very much on an acting trajectory, and I trained as an actor. And then I worked as an actor, so that involved doing bits of TV, bits of theatre. I also ran a site-specific theatre company for a little bit. So I was very much using my skills kind of in the creative industries. And then I went to the States for a couple of years where I was acting, and I was also doing a lot of voice work with actors as well, so still very much within that industry. And then I came back to the UK in 2011. It was, and I love the creative process of acting. I love the people. I loved most of the work, but it's an industry that quite often doesn't create very much autonomy. And by that, I mean, often as an actor, if you're not creating, producing your own work, you're very reliant on a whole chain of people to allow you to kind of do what you like doing. And the other thing about that as well is that, it's a very unstable income. You never know where the next thing's coming from. So I got back to the UK in 2011 and experienced quite a quiet period. And really, through luck, actually, it just so happened that I had a friend who worked at BlackRock Asset Management, and she'd just been promoted, and she was delivering a lot of presentations at work. And she said, "Can you help me?" So I helped her with that. And the process of working with her made it very clear to me that actually all the tools that I'd been using and I've been working with other actors were equally as pertinent really for her in terms of articulating her message in a boardroom or articulating her message in front of an audience. Then she brought me in to work with her team, and then the penny dropped really. So I sort of went, okay, so there's definitely a business that I can create out of this.
That's amazing, Sylvia, that so often people struggle to find what is their purpose or what is the thing that they can grow a business out of.
Yeah.
And they know the thing they're good at perhaps, but they actually don't know how to translate being good at something into a viable business. And often we underestimate the power of what we hold, the skills and the talents that we've got. And you found it there, knowing that you maybe had these abilities, but maybe not realizing that that could become your business.
Yeah, so people often say that necessity, well, people say necessity is the father of invention, but I like to say she's the mother of invention. So really it was necessity that kind of drove me to make that move, and the discovery of kind of the impact of this work. And the impact of this work really at its truest level is transformational. So in the same way that an actor will transform into a role, and in the same way that we all go through transformations within our lives, what the work that, at its absolute core, the work that I do with my clients allows them to transform into their full potential. And often that's to do with articulating their message and articulating their message in front of an audience, because something happens when you articulate that message in front of an audience. It becomes more real. There's something about the speaking of it effectively, the connection with it, and then the connection to the audience that actualizes it, or it gets you into the place where you're acknowledging where you really are in your life and what you can then go on to achieve more of.
And how much of getting in touch with that impact of the connection that you can have with the audience, how much of that is down to your acting work that you had done before? And how much of it would you say you had from childhood and learning how to deal with the difficulties that you had?
Well, it's a combination. So I definitely overcompensated with my spoken communication. And I definitely found it very liberating, being able to memorize lines and speak lines, as opposed to kind of tripping up when I was sight reading them. So there's something about language and the ownership of language when I spoke it, which was really important to me. So there was something innate there, but also maybe that was innate but necessity as well. And then when I trained as an actress, I was very lucky because I trained with someone called Patsy Rodenberg, and also Jeanette Nielsen as well, who's now the head of voice at the National. So Patsy, at the core of all of her work, and this is what I share with my clients, is presence. And so what presence is it's a state of mind, being present and in the moment, but it's also something that relates to how we are physically, what happens to our breath and what happens to our voice. So by working quite physically, you can change the voice, you can change the breath pattern, you can change how you feel, and you can change how you're relating to your audience. And so really it's that combination of things, I suppose, that I bring to my clients.
Yes. And when you take it back to the things that you learned along the way to that point, you'd acted in the UK, you went over to the US. What brought you to the US, and what did you see as different between working in acting in the UK versus in the US?
Well, do you know what I wish? If I could go back in time, I wish that I could start my acting career with the same understanding that I have now about business and marketing and understanding that really all you've got to do is solve a problem for your client, or in an acting context, all you've got to do is solve a problem for a director or a casting director. So in the UK, and this is a few years ago now, so when I was acting in the UK, it was, even though I went to a very good drama school and I had representation, it was still a very closed shop, in that you couldn't really approach directors and casting directors directly. Often you went through an agent, and often it took a long time just to get a meeting. When you got those meetings, the relationships built, and they could turn into quite solid relationships. In the States, there's much more of an open door policy. So people are much more open, people are much more, this is my experience, much more receptive. It's much easier to get first meetings with people. It's easier to get things off the ground. And so there's a real, and I was in New York as well, so there's a real dynamism about the city and about the industry. People are very front-footed and really kind of make things happen. So I'm pretty sure that it's not a coincidence that when I came back from New York, there was quite a big change, I think, in my mindset in terms of, making things happen, stepping out and making things happen.
Absolutely. And you weren't tempted to stay. So what?
Oh, I was so tempted to stay.
Yeah.
In fact, I only came back initially to sort out my visa issues. But you know what they say, life's what happens when you're making plans.
Yes, absolutely. So when you came back, you had all this energy from the different experience of working there, and from the tools and techniques that you had been honing in your practice as an actress, greatly enhanced by overcoming what others would have found as a disability in communication.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that, if I'm going to talk about, so if you think about dyslexia and ADHD and things that people call, what's the term that people use? It's neurodivergent. Neurodivergent. Yeah, there's a word from that which sort of is I can't remember what it is. It's a bit like neuro abnormal. It's not the word, but there's another frame which kind of makes it sound a bit more negative. So the thing I think about that, really, honestly, and this is based on kids I know, it's also based on really high level creatives that I know, is that, yeah, there is a problem with our education system, actually, and our education system caters mainly for young people whose brains work in a certain way. And I would definitely say that the really extraordinary people that I work with, and I have worked with some people who I would say are on the genius spectrum, their brains do not work in a way that necessarily fits with the formulaic systems of our education system. So, yes, I definitely struggled with learning to read and write. Yes, I was really lucky that I got the right kind of support. Would I have struggled so much in a different kind of education system? Probably not. So I understand. I'm very flexible in the way that I deliver my work. Probably as a result of that, I understand very quickly that different people need different things. Different people learn in different ways.
Yes, and you don't have to make them all follow one standard way.
One standard way is never going to work for everyone.
So what advice would you have to give, let's say, two different scenarios? One is if there are parents listening in today and hearing you talk and seeing the success that you've made, that you've actually built your business based on how you learned to overcome and excel despite that. So what advice would you give parents who have children that they feel may be struggling in a similar way? How can they engage in and help their children?
So one thing that I would say is get really clear on what your child's problems are and what the problems of the place that they're being educated is, because they might be two very different things. The school's problem might be this child doesn't sit still and doesn't listen. That might not actually be your child's problem. The problem might actually be that your child needs to move and learn kinesthetically. That's their primary way of learning. They might actually learn best through dance or movement, for example. So I think there's that as well. And the other thing that I would kind of reassure about is that I've got friends, who've got children on the autism spectrum and all sorts of things. It's not unusual, because it's not unusual that we recognize these things now. Is that people, and I see this with the clients that I coach as well, people learn and people progress at very different speeds. So I've seen it, with young people that I know, and I've seen it with clients, that it might seem like they're really plodding along and not getting anywhere, and then all of a sudden things skyrocket and happen very, very quickly. So where a child is today doesn't necessarily have any bearing on where they're going to be in 6 months' time, 6 years' time, 12 years' time. So keep that in mind and keep focusing on the things that they're really brilliant at. Focus on the things that they're good at. Always keep the focus on that and keep the belief in that. And the other thing, which sounds very easy, I appreciate this isn't easy, but don't worry too much. Don't get too anxious, because actually what will happen is, your child will pick up on that anxiety. And also, don't talk about it all the time. Don't make it the reason for everything. Focus on the good stuff. Focus on the stuff that they're good at. Keep reinforcing that. Because really, to be really honest with you, my spelling still is absolutely appalling. My handwriting looks like a cross between, somebody described it, a good friend of mine, it looks like a cross between stream of consciousness and hieroglyphics. It doesn't make any difference to me whatsoever. It doesn't affect my business at all. I use, audio equipment. I've got a PA who types stuff up. It makes no difference whatsoever. So the problem that might seem really debilitating, actually, in the greater context of their life, might not make any difference at all.
Yeah, I think that is such wise advice. And I endorse that wholeheartedly. My spelling is horrendous. My sister will often say to me, it's a miracle that I wrote my book, because my spelling is horrendous. And I'm quite sure there's something there. But if you focus on that and allow that to become a limitation, it becomes a limitation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the outcome. You're always focusing on what the outcome is. You know, part of what we're taught at school is a vehicle that gets us to a certain outcome, if that makes sense.
Yes. So that's the advice for parents who may have a child who will be struggling in that way. What advice would you give to the adults who have been through that journey of feeling they couldn't learn in the same way, that they haven't progressed or flourished in the same way as they would have liked to, or that other people may have done? What about the adults who have grown up with this? What advice would you give them?
So I think it's really important. I was so lucky. So first of all, I'm going to acknowledge is that I was so lucky that my dyslexia was picked up on, and I was so lucky that I had really good help with it. I was also really lucky that I trained with some of the best voice coaches and movement coaches and acting teachers when I trained as an actor. So I was really privileged in that respect. And what it gave me, as well as me making me better at what I did, is it gave me a whole new mode of learning, which was learning kinesthetically and learning auditorily, and by that I mean learning physically and learning through listening. That was the way that I learned. That was the way that I excelled. It was really tough for me going into that environment, because to be really honest with you, when I was 18, I blagged around a little bit. I knew that I had, problems with certain aspects of learning, but I knew that I was quite bright. So I kind of skived. Part of that was because I was intimidated by the learning process, I think. So to draw that to somebody else, I think it's to really acknowledge, again, it's coming back to the basics, that you learn in a different way. And you experiment and you find what works with you. And also that there are so many strengths in people whose minds work slightly differently.
I think that is so key. It's so important for people to know. If the world was made of only one type of person who learns in one way, or who experiences life in one way, or has one set of skills, it would be a very boring and unproductive place. So it takes all of the types of people, doesn't it?
It takes all types of people, and there's strength and weakness in everything. And lots of people become very resourceful because they learn differently, even if it's not acknowledged. Lots of people become very successful. So years ago, and I worked with a guy who, I worked for a guy, and it wasn't when I was acting, it was when I was in between acting jobs. I worked for a guy who was incredibly successful and incredibly rich. And he had like a multi-million-pound business that did all the shop fittings for big corporate offices. And I was chatting to him about how he got into it one day. He said, "Oh, I was really bad at school. I hated school." And then as soon as I started to work, things opened up for me. And he started working in a supermarket behind a meat counter. Like it was nothing too fancy, but actually being in the work environment and doing stuff, not sitting behind a desk, he was really good at it. And he just excelled. So he was in the right environment.
Yes.
And I think maybe that's partly it as well. Find your environment. Find the environment that feels like a good fit for you and that you can flourish in.
Yes. And I think that's vital. And how would you advise people if a lot of people tend to set their bar very low because they feel, I won't be able to achieve more than this because of whatever I've got?
I would say it's completely the opposite. I would say you can probably achieve more, but you don't get stuck on the detail. So an example is, I don't know where I'm getting these examples for. I think I was talking to someone who was, they might have been an educational psychologist, and they were describing working with someone who was dyslexic, and they're saying, well, what we're trying to do is get her spelling and her dictation good enough so that she might be able to work as a receptionist at a hairdresser's or something, and then she could speak to people on the telephone and write their names, and and then she'll have a job for life and it'll be fine. And I was like, that's a ridiculous idea, because she's never going to be particularly good at that, because it's getting her to use the skills that she's really that are really difficult for her. What you want to do is pull out what she can do, what interests her. Lots, in the world of entrepreneurs as well. If you look at Richard Branson, for example, he's dyslexic. There's so many people that are creative and break the rules and create businesses, create relationships. So there's such a broad scope, in fact, of what people end up doing. And I think often creativity is at the heart of it.
Love that. So do you have any, now that you're on the anecdotes and the stories, do you have any particular stories of situations in your acting stage of your life where you had to really excel in order to either connect with somebody or to make things happen or to get the take or whatever it is? Was there like a difficult situation that you knew, I've got to handle this differently?
So, you know, one of the things, I was very good with the spoken word. I was quite good at movement. One of the things that I've never been very good at is choreographed dance. In fact, I was really bad at choreographed dance. And so this goes all the way back to when I was at drama school. So we were rehearsing a musical and it was really tough. It was a real monkey on my shoulder, not being able to do dance moves, getting my left and right muddled up. You know, we used to, and if I was on a dance floor by myself, I'd be fine. I kind of dance around. So just to give you a bit of context, in the first year at drama school, we had to do these historical dance lessons. And what it meant is we were doing dances throughout the century. So we'd learn the Galliard, we'd learn a medieval dance. And then it came to sort of the 1920s, the 1930s, and we had to do ballroom dancing. Okay, so if you imagine it, there were all these very vain young actors in their footless tights, the boys wanting to look as good and as slick as possible. And then there were all the girls. We were kind of wearing these practice skirts and our black leotards. And because part of the thing about learning historical dance was that you had to learn the conventions of the time, and it also informed the movement of the time. So we had to kind of adhere to the conventions. So all the boys had to ask all the girls to dance. And of course, none of these young vain actors wanted to dance with me. Who couldn't remember my left from my right and kind of shuffled my feet. So I was left kind of by myself, feeling a bit disgruntled. So that laid the foundation for feeling not great about this concept of choreographed dance. And then we did a musical. And we had to, you know, we were dancing. I was part of the dance chorus and I'd really struggled the way through kind of learning all these dance moves. And but I found through doing it consistently, I actually found my own way through it. And I was working with a movement coach who was very good, and she really helped me kind of find my way through it. So then that was all fine and good. But just before doing this musical, and it's never happened to me since, it never happened to me before. I think I was so nervous that I went and I was really violently sick about half an hour before we had to go up and do this on stage. Yeah, and actually the day before, when we'd had a Saturday morning rehearsal, we'd be working with a different choreographer, who I will mention no names, who we were practicing the dance, and he looked me up and down. He said, "Oh, I said think Marilyn Monroe. I don't know. Can I swear on this podcast, or shall I be polite? What would you like me to say?"
Your way.
He looked me up and down. He said, "I said think Marilyn Monroe. You look like Wurzel fucking Gummidge." And for those of you who don't know who Wurzel Gummidge is, Wurzel Gummidge was a scarecrow that featured on a kids' TV program. So I had this ringing through my brain, and then I freaked out, but I still did it. So there was nothing that was going to stop me doing it. So sometimes, I suppose, the moral of the story is, right, sometimes we have to just do stuff that terrifies us, and just move through it. And once you've done it once, I'm probably never going to be a contestant on Come Dancing,
Maybe not.
But I won't be. But I'm never going to be terrified of it again. And I think it was trusting the work that I'd done really is the moral of that story. So even though I was nervous, I'd worked and I'd rehearsed, and you just trust the work that you've done, the steps that you've taken.
I think you're right. And it also shows that when we think we're in the middle of this thing that is scaring us or so difficult for us, and we think, I'm never going to get through it, I'm never going to survive this. Actually, we always do.
Always do. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's worth remembering, isn't it, when you're going into something that is giving you that feeling in the pit of your stomach that I can't do this, I'm going to fail, I can't. Actually, we always do. We always come out of it.
And then as soon as you've done it, so actually I had it with a client quite recently who was speaking at a very, very big event. And the interesting thing is this person, I knew that they could do it because we'd worked together really, really intensely. But the final thing was for them to get up and do it. Mm-hmm. And I really had to reiterate it to them over and over again that, listen, once you've done this, it's never going to be as scary. Once you've done this, it's never going to have any power over you at all. And, you know, the nice thing about working with a coach in that context, right, is you've got someone, you know, if you have a strong relationship with them and, you know, that trust relationship, which I know, you know, is so important, sometimes you just need that absolute reassurance. It's once you do this, it's going to be over and it's never going to have the power over you again. And you'll be able to do this again and again. This particular person not only got up on that stage and was amazing, you know, he was the best speaker of the night, but actually, you know, one of the biggest compliments that I've ever received from anyone is that actually it changed his life, because it meant that he could really move on with what he needed to do. And for him, this thing of getting in front of an audience and speaking was the last thing really that was holding him back from creating the kind of visibility and impact that he needed.
I love that advice. Sometimes you need a coach. You need somebody who's in your corner, somebody that can say to you, you can do this. And that gives you that little bit of movement to get into doing it. Yeah. Sometimes people don't have someone like that. So what can you do? You can be your own coach sometimes. Yeah.
And the thing about coaching and mentorship and all of this stuff is eventually, if you need to enough, you will do it. That's the thing, you know, you will do it and you will do it. Working with someone can accelerate that. And it can, you know, it can help set up good patterns and all those kinds of things. But if somebody's really, and I really believe this, if somebody's really determined, they will, you know, they'll achieve their outcome.
They will do it. So let's come back into your journey again, Sylvia. So you had come back to the UK, you had worked with this lady and had great success with her. It sounds like it wasn't necessarily what you had planned to be moving into doing. It just kind of turn of events that came about.
Yeah, there were a turn of events that came about, and I felt at that stage that I wanted to create more of a grounding. Mm-hmm. Financially, and also I wanted to create something that was mine, that could sustain me. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed it, actually. You know, this is quite selfish, but it's the truth, I really got a lot out of the work that I started to do at BlackRock, and I really enjoy watching people transform. So that all sort of came together. But I've been an actor. I didn't really know how to set up or run a business.
Exactly. So how was that transition for you? How did you move into that? And you know, what were the steps for you, or the lessons learned in starting up as a business person? Now,
what I did. So I thought, okay. So people need this. This will work for people. And I had a chat with my friend, and she said, "Oh, try this, write this on a little flyer, send this out to people." So I had in my head really clearly what I wanted to do, but I had no idea, genuinely, when I started, I had no idea how I was going to get from A to B, absolutely no idea, but I did have an outcome in mind. So the rest was kind of working all of that out. So I set up a website, and then I was like, great, I've got this website. So what am I going to do now? I was like, I don't know. I better go and speak to some people. So I went to some very random networking events, didn't, you know, have an idea of what I was saying. And then things started to unfold. So I really didn't have a clue to start off with, is the honest answer to this question. I went and I chatted to some people. What I found, and there are two really key things that happened. My friend Paula was a filmmaker, and she said, "Oh, come to this night, it's about creative businesses, come down." And I remember I was quite broke at the time. I remember kind of like getting myself on the bus and and going there in flat shoes and taking a deep breath and then putting my high heels on and going into this networking event. And I got chatting to this guy called Ken. And so, you know, he was a publisher, and then he invited me to another networking group. And that's where I got my first couple of clients from. So that was great. So really just taking action and speaking to people was really what propelled things. And then this is another little anecdote. I'm currently working with a biotech investment fund called Sofanova, and they're a big fund in biotech. They're quite well known. I met somebody at a similar kind of a networking event right in my early days, who was very young and he'd just become a doctor. So we met for a coffee, and then 2 years later, I gave him some training because he wanted to become a business consultant. I didn't think about him anymore. Then I got a call from him probably about 18 months ago, saying, oh, I've just been speaking to my head of comms, totally out of it about what you do. She really wants to have a meeting with you. And so I had a meeting there, and I'm doing quite a big chunk of work with them now. So the moral of that story is you never know where a conversation is going to lead. And also you never know how far down the line that's going to blossom into something that's potentially quite big. So go out and talk to people is what I did. But I still, you know, I needed to refine my message to market and this and that. So I was doing okay. I was kind of picking things out a little bit. And then about 8 years ago, I got some business mentorship with two people called Chris Lambert-Galwin and Kareen Lambert-Galwin, and they run a company called Heart Centered Businesses. And actually, what was so brilliant about working with them is that they basically gave me structure to use. That's all I needed, was a structure that I could still have my own messaging and, you know, do my own thing, but just a structure of how to get to A to B. I would have got from A to B anyway by myself, but it would have taken longer and it would have been a much more squiggly kind of a route. So that's when things really kind of started to take off for me and become easy. And I was accessing higher level clients, really comfortable charging what my full value is to those clients as well.
And that, I think that's a wonderful point, charging your full value. A lot of people are afraid to charge. They're afraid to put a price that is a premium. And they're thinking, well, people won't pay this. Maybe they can't afford it. Maybe I'm not worth that. But in truth, what you charge is very much a reflection of the investment that people are willing to put into their journey. And the more you charge, the more investment people put into it, the more outcome they always get from it.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I completely agree with that. And the cost of something is totally irrelevant. It's the value and what the value is to that person.
Yes.
So to contextualize, one of my clients worked for an industry leader, we'll just say an industry leader, and there was some event awards, and they were getting up on stage. They were up for winning several awards that year. And on the night of the awards, they were going to have to talk about, you know, the company and X, Y, Z. Now, the way that they showed up on the stage that night had a direct bearing on the share price of the company, and also would have had a direct bearing on the amount of merchandise that they turned over. So they invested 6 figures in working with me, but the return on that investment was probably tenfold of that. Mm-hmm. So the person needs to understand what the value of the work is. Now, there'll be some people who don't need what I do. Mm. They genuinely don't need it. They're not at a stage where it's important and they need it enough. They're never going to be my clients because it's not valuable enough to them. And that's fine.
It's important for us all to know that we don't need to work with everybody, because when you try to work with everybody, you're actually not meeting anybody's need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the value bit is what is it that you offer that allows that person to get what they want, what they need. Because it's getting them to, often getting a person in coaching or mentorship. I think it's often about getting that person to the next stage. Or what happens if you can articulate your message, you're not scared of being in front of audiences, where does that take your business? Where does that take your creative visibility?
So what is it like, Sylvia, working with you? What is the experience of
wonderful. You might have to ask some of my ex-clients my view.
To put it into one word, it's wonderful. I love it. Yeah.
I would say it's transformational. It's transformational, and probably that transformational. Ideally, that transformation is into your full potential.
Yeah. And what are maybe one or two more examples then of the kind of people that you've worked with? I mean, not naming names or anything, but they come to you with an issue, and you have to then figure out, how do you decide what is it that they need from you, and how do you deliver that to them and work with them to achieving it? So what's that journey?
So in all honesty, the steps are normally quite similar, but how you deliver those steps can be different based on the person. So we all have everything that we need to be fully present in front of an audience and to vocally and physically be fantastic communicators. We're all born with a perfect breath system. We're all born, unless something is genuinely wrong, with perfect posture. If you look at the way that a child, a toddler walks around, and we're all born with the most incredibly powerful voices. If we couldn't cry loudly as babies, then we wouldn't survive. It's kind of that simple. So a lot of what I do initially is just getting rid of the stuff which is sitting on top of that. So we're looking at the body, the breath, the voice, and then the delivery of the message. And then, I aim to get all my clients to a place of mastery, which means that you can be in front of any audience under any amount of pressure. You can be in control of your state. You can be present, and you can start to facilitate your audience on a journey. So it always starts with the physicality. So when you're in front of an audience, when you're nervous, what happens is the body gets tense. And we all have our own individual tension patterns, and they always increase when we're under more pressure. So we suss out where they are and we release them. And the first step is to get you engaged physically before you speak. So your radio interview or your live presentation or your TV interview starts from the moment that the audience or the camera can see you. And so by getting your body into the right state, not only will you get people to sit forward and listen before you speak, but you'll also be taking the first step to keep yourself calm and present. So the body is really like a domino in a set of other dominoes. So for most people, where the wheels fall off is when they start to kind of rush when they speak. They kind of get a thumping heartbeat, and some people forget what they're saying, some people get jumbled, some people talk faster. There's this kind of panicky feeling. Now that's because when we get nervous, the body gets tense. When the body gets tense, we start to do something most people which is called clavicle breathing, which means you breathe into the top of your chest because you're tense, basically. So what we then do is we get people using their full breath. And when you use your full breath, you have more oxygen, so you feel calmer. You also get more oxygen to the frontal lobe of the brain, so you can access information more easily. And so we use the breath to keep the person calm and clear. And the breath is also another way that we can engage further with our audience. So we're using the body to be fully present, the breath to stay calm and clear, and then the voice. So the voice really sits on top of the body and the breath. And if the body isn't engaged with the belly breath, which is what babies use, then two things happen to the voice, which mean that we don't connect effectively with our audience. And we will have experienced all of these. And everyone listening to this will have either experienced them themselves, or they would have heard it and they would have gone, oh God, yeah. So when the voice isn't supported by the breath, people can sometimes kind of do this and they push from the throat in order to be heard. And when that happens, it's as if the sound waves are going over the head of the audience, right? I can see you on the call, you go, oh no, stop it. Yeah, the audience can go like this. Whoa, there's a disconnect. And if we're in front of an audience, we see that disconnect, and then it gets even worse. The other thing that can happen to the voice is the opposite, right? The voice kind of deadens off and it falls on the floor. Or sound waves are falling on the floor. And when that happens, the audience are kind of going, oh my goodness, like, how long is this going to last? Yeah. Now, in that state, often when the voice drops, often we become a bit more internalized as well. So that's where we can get that kind of critical voice that sits somewhere here, giving us an unuseful critique of what we're doing. So we engage the voice then, which means it reaches your audience. So that means, of course, you're better heard, but it deepens that sense of connection. So the communication with the audience becomes listening and responsive. Even if it's just you speaking, there's an intention and there's a connection to it. Then you can start to play. So you can start to, use the voice to influence. You can use different areas of your voice. You can start to kind of tailor your messaging effectively. And then you've got the delivery. So all you're ever doing is you're using the body, the breath, and the voice to support your delivery. And that might change in different settings slightly, might change if you're in a one-to-one meeting or if you're on a large stage, but the core skills are the same. And then in the delivery, we look at structure and linguistics. So how you structure a presentation, how you stay on point with an interviewer, for example, are a couple of things you might do. And that's to do with linguistics, but also structuring your communication. And the structuring of the communication is spoken so that you're learning it kinesthetically as well and vocally. People need different things to get there, right? Often people, actually I was working with someone this morning, he's very open, so he just does it. He just moves into it quite quickly. This guy's done quite a lot of yoga. He's done quite a lot of breathing techniques. I think he did quite a lot of martial arts as well. And he's working at quite a high level. So, and he's very unusual. But with a client like that, he's very open. And so you can very quickly give him concepts, which he's able to grasp and physicalize. That's very unusual. So for a lot of people, what you have to do initially is you have to kind of unblock them. So part of that unblocking process is the physicality, because it starts with the body, but it's also the mental state as well. So the kind of work that I do, you get the quickest results by relaxing into it and just doing it and just trusting it, which is all very well and good to say, right? If you're saying to a really stressed out banker or a human rights lawyer, all you've got to do is relax and just relax into it, because they're not actually going to be able to do it. Does that make sense? So in the first instant, for a lot of people, it means we find a process which allows them to release physically, stop thinking, and then for the breath to start to work.
Perfect advice. And I know a lot of people will be saying, but I can't relax. I do not understand. I cannot relax. I'm so afraid. My voice will go, my legs will go, my stomach will go. And people think I can't relax. So what advice would you give our listeners if they're in a similar situation and they're...
So the reason that your legs, your voice, your breath will go is because you're not relaxed. The key thing that you need to do, and it's a key thing, and this is where kind of coaching and learning comes, goes hand in hand. Everybody gets nervous, right? Everybody gets nervous before they go up on stage. Even, a professional speaker or a professional actor. The difference is people who do it professionally know how to control their nerves. They know how to become physically relaxed and how to allow the breath to work when they're feeling nervous. And when you can do that, you might have a little tickle in, the butterflies at the bottom of your stomach, but it doesn't overwhelm you. Whereas if you can't relax and if everything gets tense, that's really when the wheels fall off. And so ideally, it's this thing, these two things that sit hand in hand. Ideally, we want everyone to be really relaxed and focused in front of an audience, never coming from a place of tension. That takes a process to get to. And the process is, but the good news about the process is we're getting you back to what you originally have in the first place. We can then start to enhance it and play with it and make it even better. But even if we just get you back to what you've naturally got and trusting that and using that when you're under pressure, that's enough. Does that make sense?
It really does. I would love so many people to hear this and to know I can stand in front of a group, whether it's just in a meeting room at work, or if you have to get on a stage, or if you have to deliver a report of some kind, and people say, I can't do that.
I had one client who was literally in this ballpark completely. Fact, it took a lot of work to get him to commit to coming to work with me. And he was someone who'd walked away from a very high-powered job, an elite tech company, because he could not bear having to give presentations. So he literally walked away from probably, I'm guessing, round about 200k in his pay packet because he just hated it. It's a shame that he didn't come to see me before he did. But anyway, he came to see me and he was saying, I can't do it. I can't do it. And we did a session and he got relaxed and he accessed his voice and he accessed his breath and he said, oh yeah, I can do it. And I said, great, let's move forward with some training then. And he went, oh no, I'm going to have to think about it. I said, well, what have you got to think? No, I've got to think about it. So I phoned him the next day and I said, okay, have you had a good, yeah, well, it seemed to work when we worked together, but I'm not sure it's going to work for me. And so I said to him, listen, I promise it's going to. And if it doesn't, I guarantee it will work until it does work for you. Anyway, he had a presentation 2 sessions into our training package. And he was like, if you think of the scale of being scared, he was really high up on that scale, right? He'd rather walk away. He would rather have walked away from £200,000 than have to present regularly. Like this is really at the top end of loathing speaking in public, right? So I didn't have very long to work with him to just get him over this first hump, and what I focused on was just his physicality initially, sitting with his feet. Luckily he was sitting and it was a Zoom call. I got him to sit with his feet in parallel and ground his feet, and whatever he did, keep his feet grounded on the floor. That was the main thing that I did with him. And I was like an evil ballet teacher almost, saying, ground your feet, say it again, ground your feet, and engage your breath, breathe through your mouth like you're saying happy birthday, which means that you start to do what's called a horizontal breath, and the breath becomes fluid. It was those 2 things that I drilled into him. And then we did a tiny bit of work on his mindset and kind of visualizing the outcome and getting him really clear about what he was doing to the audience, how he was making his audience feel, so that the intention of what he was doing was outbound as opposed to being inbound. And when it's inbound, we go, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I saying? And saying, it's not about you. It's your job to make your audience feel calm. So it's a combination of just getting him to start to release physically, access a little bit of his breath, and then just think about his audience differently. That gave him everything he needed to get through the presentation. And he was really pleased. He said, well, it wasn't perfect, but I think it went really, really well. And everyone listened. And I just can't wait to see where this is going to go. So often it's making really small shifts initially, but really committing to them.
Mm-hmm. They're the building block.
The building blocks aren't huge. And actually the building blocks aren't particularly complex, really, but it's the doing of it and it's the committing to it.
Love that. And what people underestimate, I think, a lot of the time is that your audience, whether it's in the meeting room or whether it's a big audience at an event you're speaking at, generally your audience want you to succeed. They're in your corner.
Absolutely in your corner. And if you think about it, your audience don't really care about you, they care about themselves. Their only interest in you is whether you can entertain them or give them a good time or not. So you make your primary concern your audience, not yourself. Because the wheels fall off and we start to get that internal voice when we start to think about ourselves. Oh, what are they thinking about me? Am I going to say the right thing? They're not. It's your job to facilitate their experience. So you're a facilitator, as opposed to somebody who's up on a stage being judged and people have got tick boxes saying, wow, don't think you said that right. I think the other thing to remember, which is the truth, is your audience don't know what you're going to say before your speech. So if you make a mistake, it doesn't matter. As long as what you're saying makes sense, and as long as you're speaking with credibility, it doesn't matter. And it's not about being perfect. It's a process.
It is a process. And as you say, it's about, excuse me, it's about giving them what they need out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you are meeting their need, they want that from you. So they are in your corner to make sure that you give them what they need. They're excited.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something that you are there to give them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another thing that, you're absolutely right. Just getting absolute clarity about what your audience want, what they need to know is so key, because you're always moving towards that objective. What are you helping them to think, feel, do differently?
Yes. it's truly transformational work that you do.
Yeah, I think it's transformational for my clients. It's also transformational for me as well. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for every single person that trusts me, to go through this process with me. And I'm I'm really grateful for, there's probably hundreds of people now, for the hundreds of people that I've worked with, because you learn something new with every single person that you work with.
It all adds into your toolkit where you can help more people with more experiences.
Yeah.
Love that. Do you ever do group sessions?
I do sometimes do group sessions. I often do group sessions within organizations. I don't run groups at the moment. I'm generally just working with one-to-one clients, but sometimes I'll go in and run a group for an organization.
And do you find that's a different experience when you do that compared to the one-to-one?
It's slightly different. I mean, people bounce off each other a lot in group sessions. It really depends. People flourish in both settings. It is what I would say. I think there's something about being in a room with someone one-to-one and being their sole focus. If you've got if you're very scared of public speaking, or if you've got a huge kind of career-changing event in front of you, often it's very useful to have that really kind of tailored, present approach. However, in group settings, it can be really fun, and you get to observe other people on a journey as well, and observe how other people, change.
Love that. And what's coming next for you, Sylvia?
What's coming next for me? Well, I'm starting some work with quite a well-known creative director in the next couple of weeks. So that will be very good fun for me. And I'm planning, this was delayed slightly this year, I'm planning to create a sister company to my own company, which will be a content company. So this company will create video content and online learning, which will allow more people to access the kind of work that I do.
Fantastic. So how can people find you? I think so many people need you so badly to help them find that comfort in getting their message across and feeling comfortable in the environments to do that. How can they find you?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, which is sylviacohencommunication.com. So sort of says what it does on the tin. Sylvia with a Y. And on, by all means, kind of read about me. There's some testimonial videos on there. And then the process that we use normally is that you can contact my assistant and we'll have a bit of a chat with you, and then come and see me at my practice, and we'll do a diagnostic session. We'll see what's going on for you at the moment, where you see yourself. And we do a little bit of work so that you get to experience what the work's like. And then normally by the end of that process, we're clear as to whether this is the right thing to move you forward or not. If it's not, that's fine. You'll still leave the session with some tips and a greater understanding. And if it is, then normally we'll do a training package of some kind together.
Beautiful. And more people need to be doing this. And just one last question, Sylvia, if you could go back in time to give yourself a boost or a bit of advice, what age would you go back to and what would you say?
Oh, I think I would go back to 18. I think that's probably what I'd do. And it's not very fun advice that I'd give myself, to be really, really. I think everyone wants this, don't you? I'd love to go back to being 18 and kind of, starting my proper acting career. I'd love to go back to it with much more of a business-minded approach. Actually, it's a real shame. And again, this might have changed, it's a real shame that often actors, and I think also musicians as well, aren't given that understanding of part of their training process, because actually as a freelancer creative, you can be the most brilliant person in the world. Some people are very, very lucky, but what gives you longevity and what gives you an edge is often having that very having a business mind. Think of it like a business. It's quite empowering.
Yes.
That's a very boring answer.
It's
I'm not sure how my 18-year-old self would have responded to that.
But it's the important advice that would stay in your head and remind you there's got to be a business sense to this as well.
Yeah, because it's what keeps you safe, I
Yes.
think, actually, and it's what gives young creatives more autonomy, because it can be very disempowering for lots of young creatives, I think.
And I think it's wonderful advice to be able to give your younger self, because at that age, we're more focused on what we want to do rather than what we should do or need to do. And I think that gives that little bit of balance of, yes, do what you want to do what you're great at, but what you need is to make sure
you need
business sense.
Yeah, it's not even that it makes business sense. It is, if I think about, this sounds very dry, right? If I think about what my marketing and sales process is now, right? If I'd understood that process, the way that I would have handled directors, casting directors, agents at the beginning of my career would have been totally different. It would have been completely different. I would have really understood the value of all of those relationships. I would have understood how to foster those relationships more effectively. I would have understood how, for a lot of those people within the industry, who run the industry, even though it's creative, it's a business. So you're solving a problem for them. You're building a network. You're utilizing that network. And I would have had a system for being able to do it.
I think it's great advice. I think what you're talking about there taps into, again, what you've mentioned before. It's understanding your audience. And if the agents you're talking to or the different groups of stakeholders that you're talking to, those are the audience. And we tend to go into it often thinking of me and what I want instead of what is it that they need out of this and how am I going to give them what they need.
Absolutely. And then that's kind of a partnership. And then you can do whatever, someone who's very good at this. Well, they're two people, right? They're two people I think are brilliant. They're quite different people. So if you listen to Will Smith's, biography, he was very, very business minded, very, very clear about that. And actually it created a lot more creative choices for him in the end. And then there's somebody else who I think is brilliant as well, who's a director actually, called Clint Dyer, and he's the assistant creative director at the National, but he also directed Get Up and Stand Up, which is the musical about Bob Marley that's on in the West End at the moment. And because I've known him for a while, what I've seen is he's a great example of someone who's really stuck to his guns, creatively, and he creates very, very detailed, very uncompromising work, and he's stuck at it for a long time. It's his life's work, and it's now at a stage where it's getting the recognition that it really deserves, I think, and there's something very powerful within that. So that's someone who's really taken creative control.
I like that a lot. Great examples. And I think Will Smith, for sure, despite any little blips along the road, is an incredible person. He has so much wisdom and so much focus. He talks about that you will find better actors, you will find more handsome men, you will find better singers, better dancers, you'll find better people, but you will never find someone that works harder than me. That's what he talks about, and it shows. It works.
Absolutely.
Sylvia, thank you so much for sharing so many tips and stories and experiences with us and your journey. It's been invaluable. I've certainly loved it. So thank you very, very much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. I've loved it as well. So thank you very much for having me. And thank you everyone that's listened or will listen.
And that will be getting in touch with you for sure, because everybody needs to be seeing you.
Yeah, everybody needs to be seeing me.
Love it. So thank you, Sylvia, and thank you to our listeners for joining in for another episode of Limitless Potential. And we will see you again soon for another story, another journey, and more inspiration on how to tap into your very own limitless potential. See you soon.